Move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? I'll give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has broken promises to cut electricity bills, to provide cheaper mortgages and to ensure that families will be better off on the cost of living. The price of electricity is now up by 22%. We've endured 12 mortgage rate hikes and the prices for food and groceries are up more than 11%. Isn't it clear to Australians this government has lost its way because of this Prime Minister's lack of economic management and experience and general incompetence?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Take a point of order on relevance on this.
That's right. Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. And of course, the Leader of the Opposition asked me about cost of living. And there's one thing that is consistent about our cost of living measures, which is they have all been opposed by those opposite. They opposed, even last week, they opposed the tax cuts that we gave to every Australian taxpayer. But those opposite were against that. They opposed the energy price relief plan that we put in place. They were against that. They were opposed to fee-free tape. They were against that. They were opposed to cheaper childcare. They were against that.
Opposed to wage rises.
We know they were opposed to wage rises, whether it be the 3 increases in the minimum wage or whether it be the additional wage rises for people who work in aged care or who work as early educators in our childcare system. We know that that was the case. But we know also that those opposite, when it comes to economic policy, do have some half-baked plans. They have a plan for nuclear reactors sometime in the 2040s, but they won't tell us how much they will cost. What we do know is that they are the most costly form of new energy, and we know it will take too long, and we know even after all of that it will produce something like 4% of the energy needs that Australia has. We know also
Minister for Climate Change.
That they have a plan to break up supermarkets. Now, I'm not sure who will buy the Coles supermarket at their local shopping centre next to Woolworths, but I suspect it will probably be Woolworths. There's nothing, of course, to stop IGA setting up anywhere in the country, but that's what happens when you have the Nats running their economic policy. But they came out with something else, Mr Speaker, last week, which is zonal taxation. So depending upon where you live, you will pay a different rate of tax under this Leader of the Opposition. The troika of economic irrationality.
Members on my left.
Zonal taxation, depending upon where you live. Breaking up private sector companies through forced divestment. And nuclear reactors owned by the government sometime in the 2040s. Mr Speaker, the party of Menzies is a long time gone. Mr Speaker.
Order. There is far too much noise on my left. The Manager of Opposition Business, the Leader of the Nationals, continually interjecting. I'm just going to have a bit more silence during the answer to this question. Give the call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Early Childhood Education. How is the Albanese Labor government recognising the professional work of early childhood educators and helping them with the costs of living? And what approaches to early childhood education has the government rejected?
The call to the Minister for Childhood Education and the Minister for Youth.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the amazing member for Canberra for her question and for her ongoing advocacy and support for early childhood education and care workers in Canberra. Mr Speaker, last week the Albanese government made an historic announcement for a 15% wage increase for early childhood education and care workers who carry out the vital and important role of caring for and educating our youngest Australians. And this is on top of supporting not one, not two, but 3 increases to the award wage of early childhood educators, as well as our tax cuts. Now, Mr Speaker, I have spoken to educators right across the country who have told me how much they love their job. And their dedication to children's well-being and to children's development is on show at every single centre that I have visited across Australia. But they also tell me this. They also tell me that love doesn't pay the bills. Now, this wage increase will make a real and tangible difference for over 200,000 workers in Australia. Now, Sia, an educator from Victoria, said this. She said that instead of searching for a second job, this pay increase will help me now pay rent and put food on my table. This 15% wage increase means that an average ECEC educator will receive a pay rise of over $100 per week, increasing to over $150 a week from December 2025. And an early childhood teacher gets an additional $166 a week, increasing to $249 a week from December 2025. This is a great outcome for a highly feminised workforce. But, Mr Speaker, unsurprisingly, yet disappointingly, the opposition doesn't understand how important this wage increase is for the sector. The opposition leader dismissed the wage increase as, I quote, a few dollars a week and refused to support it. Well, the opposition leader would do well to go out and speak to ECEC workers, people like Karen, an educator in his home state of Queensland, who said that this will change people's lives. It means that early childhood educators who have been relying on Food Bank to feed their families won't have to do that anymore. Every Australian, whether you're a parent, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, if you know an early childhood educator or if you are an early childhood educator, every Australian knows how important this work is. It's not just about wiping bums and noses, but it's only a Labor government that will deliver a fair and decent wage increase for early childhood workers.
The call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Last week, the RBA said, quote, "Public demand is forecast to be stronger than previously expected, reflecting recent public spending announcements by federal and state and territory governments." End quote. But the Prime Minister dismissed this, claiming that's not what they've said. Why is this Prime Minister in denial that Labor's spending is causing homegrown inflation and keeping interest rates higher for longer?
The call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the Deputy Leader for her question. This is what the RBA Governor Michelle Bullock said last Thursday in Armidale. Governments have a job to do and I have a job to do, right? My job and the Reserve Bank's job is to get inflation down, right? Governments have a different job. Their job is also to get inflation down, and they acknowledge that, but it's also to provide services and infrastructure for the Australian people, and so they need to do that at the same time as they need to focus on keeping inflation down. That's precisely what we're doing.
The member for Fisher.
And it's also consistent with what the Governor told estimates in May, where she said fiscal policy has been running a surplus for the last couple of years. So I would say that's been helping the inflation situation, if anything. Now, I know that for those opposite, a budget surplus is something that is foreign to them, Mr Speaker. You may as well be talking a different language, because they promised a surplus in their first year and every year thereafter, and they produced none. And we turned a $78 billion Liberal deficit into a $22 billion surplus, and then backed it up with a second surplus that's on its way as well. And this is also what Michelle Bullock, the RBA Governor, had to say about inflation. Inflation has fallen substantially since its peak in 2022. This is what she said 6th of August last week. She spoke about international experience as well. We've seen from overseas experience how bumpy inflation can be on the way down and across the economy. She had that to say as well. She's been very, very consistent. We have been consistent. What we have been doing is making sure that we do continue to have inflationary pressure put down, which is why we have halved it since we came to office. At the same time, we're not leaving people behind. We've given tax cuts to every Australian, something that the questioner here, the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, said they would roll back. Now, we await the Deputy Leader of the Opposition during the election campaign saying when it will be rolled back. Well, when are you going to roll it back? That's what we want to know. So get ready for whenever it's called. You stand up there and you say we're going to roll back the tax cuts that we've put in place in order to support your ideological position, which is simply inconsistent.
Has concluded. Give the call to the honourable member for Dunkley.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What has been the reaction to the Albanese Labor government's decision to increase early educator wages, and why is it important to support our early educator workforce?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the sensational member for Dunkley, for her question. Mr Speaker, our early educators deserve a gold medal. You like that? And silver and bronze. And they also deserve a pay rise. And that's what this government is delivering, a 15% pay rise. That means an extra $100 a week from December. Mr Speaker, we've already cut the cost of childcare for more than 1 million Australian families, and this is the next step, lifting up the pay of the people who make all of this possible. Some of the lowest paid workers in this country and some of our most important, people who help to ensure that our kids start school ready to learn. The US President often makes the point that children that go to preschool are 50% more likely to then go on to college or to university. So this isn't babysitting. This is early education. It's not about changing nappies. It's about changing lives. And what we announced last week is not just a 15% pay rise. We announced two things: a 15% pay rise for workers, but also a 4.4% fee cap to keep prices down for parents. So it's a pay rise for more than 200,000 workers, and we're keeping prices down for more than 1 million Australian families. It's a win for workers and it's a win for parents. And that's why everyone has backed it, except for the Liberal Party that has attacked it. And there's no better example of that than the ramblings of that policy heavyweight, Senator Gerard Rennick, who on Saturday hopped onto Twitter and said that childcare destroys the family unit. The truth is, it's units like that that destroy the Liberal Party's credibility. It's comments like that that make you think the modern Liberal Party thinks that women with little kids shouldn't go back to work, shouldn't have a paid job. If there were awards handed out for cookers, this bloke would win a Michelin star. And, Mr Speaker, if the opposition leader had any ticker, he would pull this bloke into line. And maybe he would pull the plug on his computer. And then he would back this pay rise for some of the lowest paid and important workers in this country. Because we want more kids to start school ready to learn. We want more kids to finish high school and then go on to TAFE and to university. We want a better and a fairer education system, and this is where it starts.
Before I call the member for Kooyong, I'm pleased to advise the House that present in the gallery today are representatives from Drugarm, who are visiting Parliament House today in celebration of 175 years of service by the Drug Awareness and Relief Foundation. I'm also pleased to advise that Ms Dana Wortley MP, former Senator for South Australia and a current member of the House of Assembly, and also Mr Russell Wortley, a member of the Legislative Council of South Australia, and former member Leonie Short is with us today. Welcome to you all. Give the call to the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is for the Treasurer. Treasurer, 1 in 8 Australians live in poverty. Helping them helps all of us. It means that more Australians can afford to pay their rent and their bills, to get to interviews and get a job, to feed their kids and themselves. Eradicating poverty would transform their lives as well as our economy. Will you instruct the Productivity Commission to inquire into the economic cost of poverty to Australia?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Kooyong for her question about an issue very near and dear not just to her heart but mine and to everyone on this side of the House, and that is how do we go about in the most responsible way that we can making life easier for the most vulnerable people in our community. The honourable member who follows these things closely would know that the Productivity Commission has already, quite recently, put out what I thought was a really terrific piece of work about social mobility, intergenerational mobility in our communities. And for me, this goes really to the heart of the matter that the member for Kooyong raises for the House today, which is how do we make sure that people can not just get by but get ahead, and how can we make sure that this intergenerational disadvantage which exists in many of our communities, including, if we're honest about it, communities like the one that I represent, how do we prevent that from cascading through the generations? And that's the work that the PC did, and I wanted to thank the chair of the PC, Danielle Wood, and her colleagues for doing that important piece of work, because I think the PC has given us an important reminder about how much we cherish intergenerational mobility in this country, but also how we can't be complacent, particularly at the very bottom end of the income and wealth scale, and also when it comes to the very top as well. And so I know that the honourable member's question is well motivated, and I know it's well informed by that work that the PC has already done. We're not contemplating another study of that kind, in addition to the one that the PC has just released. But we are, as a government, as a Labor government, proudly very focused on the most vulnerable people in our society and on that question of intergenerational disadvantage. You know, it's why we increased JobSeeker and the working age payments, working closely with my colleagues here on the front bench. It's why energy bill relief has happened a couple of times. It's why we've made sure that everyone gets a tax cut and not just people who are already doing a bit better than others. It's why I work closely with the minister on a whole program of addressing place-based disadvantage in our communities where that is the biggest challenge. It's why we've supported increases to the minimum wage. It's why we're supporting decent pay rises for early childhood educators and others as well. It's why we've expanded paid parental leave. There are a whole range of things, Mr Speaker, that we are doing. I could go on about those things that we are doing. We're proud of the progress that we've made for Australia's most vulnerable people, but we don't pretend that every challenge in our economy and, more importantly, in our society has been fixed. That's why the work of the PC about mobility is so important to us, and that's why in every single budget we do what we can to help the most vulnerable people in our country.
Call to the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government helping to ensure childcare workers are valued and paid fairly, and what has been the response?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Hasluck for her question and for welcoming me into a childcare centre in her electorate last Friday morning, where we were able to speak directly with the workers who do such an extraordinary job in looking after our youngest Australians, who are there not just to mind children, they're there to educate them. Both educate them in terms of early learning, but also in the social interaction that comes from that engagement. And that's why last week I was very proud that we announced the 15% increase in pay for these essential workers. 10% in December this year, 5% in December next year. A total increase of $155 extra money in their pocket, which is added to by the fact that all of them will benefit as well from tax cuts. tax cuts that we've put in place, tax cuts of which they would have either got none if they were part-time workers or very little if they were working full-time. Early educators do an extraordinary job, and this wage increase will make sure that the system doesn't continue to see people leave it because they can't afford to stay there. This is good for workers, good for children, good for families and good for our national economy, because early learning also allows people to either re-enter the workforce after having a child, or to stay or to work 1 or 2 extra days extra that they would. Claire, at my electorate in Leichhardt, where we launched the announcement last week, said this: it will help tremendously. It means that the teachers who are really passionate about the industry will stay. They don't have to leave. And indeed it will. But of course those opposite, of course, refuse to embrace this change. They say they support workers, but there's always a but. There's always a but. I don't oppose helping families, but, and they go on to say why they're against it with their relentless negativity. And the minister's already spoken about our friend Senator Rennick, personally endorsed by the Leader of the Opposition earlier this term in a pre-selection battle in the LNP, where he spoke about institutionalised childcare as a sacred cow for the Labor Party. He said it destroyed the family unit, but he went on to say it brainwashed children early with the woke mind virus. I mean, this stuff is just extraordinary. It's from an elected senator, someone who actually gets to vote on legislation in this parliament.
Call to the member for Hume.
My question is to the Treasurer. Independent economist Chris Richardson said last week's RBA statement was about as clear as they can be. There is extra budget spending in the system which is fuelling inflation. But the Treasurer said last week, I don't think that's what the statement says. When will the Treasurer cut the spin and take responsibility for decisions that are driving up his homegrown inflation?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I take responsibility for the decisions that we've made in our budget, and I do that proudly, Mr Speaker. I take responsibility for the cost of living help that they don't support. I take responsibility for the responsible economic management which is completely foreign to them. I take responsibility for the surpluses that we have delivered that they weren't capable of delivering in 9 attempts, Mr Speaker. Now, if the Shadow Treasurer knew what he was talking about, he would know that the Governor of the Reserve Bank, as the Prime Minister said a moment ago, has said very clearly, my personal view is that they are doing what they can in this area, Mr Speaker. And I think with the Governor of the Reserve Bank saying that we're doing what we can with our surpluses and the way we've designed our cost of living help, I think that's an important thing to factor in, Mr Speaker. You can't believe a word that the Shadow Treasurer says about this. Now, Mr Speaker, to pick up the bizarre logic of the Shadow Treasurer. Now, first of all, obviously, a net additional spend this year of $10 billion is not the primary determinant of prices in a $2.6 trillion economy. I shouldn't have to explain that to the Shadow Treasurer, Mr Speaker. But even if we accepted that point, by the Shadow Treasurer's bizarre logic, that $10 billion additional spend, which is a fraction of the additional spend that they had in 2022, by his logic, he is taking responsibility when inflation was higher and rising faster. Those opposites spent more in their last budget.
Order.
And so, Mr Speaker,
the Treasurer will pause. The member for Hume on a point of order.
Relevance, Mr Speaker. The question was about the Treasurer's hopeless decisions that are driving up.
The Treasurer was asked about the RBA statement and about order. Don't talk over me when I'm dealing with your point of order. Trust me. You won't be here to hear the answer. The Treasurer was asked about taking responsibility regarding the issue of inflation. So he is being directly relevant. So I'm going to listen carefully to him to make sure that he is being relevant to the question. Treasurer has the call.
Mr Speaker, we've turned 2 big Liberal deficits into 2 big Labor surpluses. We've designed our cost of living relief to put downward pressure on inflation, not upward pressure on inflation, and we're providing the responsible economic management that they were incapable of delivering in 9 years in office. And we know what's really going on here, Mr Speaker. And what's really going on here is the Shadow Treasurer was disappointed and embarrassed last week because he desperately wants interest rates to go up, and they didn't. He desperately wanted underlying inflation the week before that to go up, and instead it went down. Now, while the rest of Australia was cheering for our Olympians, he was cheering for higher interest rates and more pain, Mr Speaker. And he wants higher inflation and he wants higher interest rates because he doesn't want anyone to notice that in the 3rd year of a 3-year term, he still doesn't have any costed or credible economic policies, Mr Speaker. He still won't come clean on the $315 billion in cuts that he says that the economy needs. He still won't tell people what that means for Medicare or for pensions or for the economy more broadly, Mr Speaker. On this side of the House, we acknowledge people are doing it tough. We're helping with the cost of living, we're repairing the budget, and we're making our economy more resilient at the same time. Those opposite did none of those things.
Concluded. The call to order. The member for Hume is warned. The call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Treasurer. How is the Albanese Labor government's responsible economic management right for the conditions we confront, and what approaches have the government rejected?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and to the wonderful member for her question. Look, the 2 big influences on our economy, Mr Speaker, are global uncertainty and cost of living pressures, and they're combining to slow our economy at the same time. Our economic plan anticipated this balance of risks, and we're responding with cost of living relief and budget repair and investments to make our economy more resilient, as I said a moment ago. Now, the extreme volatility that we've seen on global markets in recent weeks is a real warning against complacency. Inflation is sticky and it's stubborn and it's more persistent than we'd like. We're seeing that around the world, including in Europe, where inflation has just gone up again, and in the US and Canada, where it zigged and zagged on the way down, Mr Speaker. Now, there's no shortage of challenges in our economy, but we've made some welcome progress in the last 2 years, as the Prime Minister said a moment ago. Inflation has halved on our watch. Wages growth has doubled. Almost 1 million jobs have been created, which is a record. There are tax cuts for every taxpayer. And then we've still turned, despite all of that, tax cuts, energy bill relief, we've still turned 2 big Liberal deficits into 2 big Labor surpluses. Now, Mr Speaker, those opposite don't want anyone in Australia to remember that when we came to office, inflation had a 6 in front of it. Now it has a 3 in front of it. Rates were already rising when we came to office. Wages were stagnant. The deficits were much bigger, and the budget was weighed down by rorts and waste and debt, and the Shadow Treasurer was a poster child for all that, Mr Speaker. That is their record. Now, the Shadow Treasurer, I said a moment ago, was disappointed and he was embarrassed last week because he desperately wanted interest rates to go up, and they didn't. He desperately wanted underlying inflation to go up the week before, and instead it went down. Same with the monthly read, same with the quarterly read on homegrown non-tradable inflation, Mr Speaker. And as I said, most people in Australia are cheering for the interest rates and for the cost of living pressures to be alleviated in the coming months. The Shadow Treasurer wants life to get harder for people, and that's because he doesn't want anyone to say, hang on a minute, Shadow Treasurer, you say there should be $315 billion worth of cuts. Well, what are they? What does it mean for pensions and indexation? What does it mean for Medicare? What does it mean for the broader economy as well? He still can't tell us why they oppose tax cuts for every taxpayer or energy bill relief, and how they'll roll back the cost of living help. He still can't tell us how much the nuclear reactors will cost, or how he'll pay to reinstate the old Stage 3 tax cuts. So, Mr Speaker, we acknowledge people are doing it tough. We're helping where we can in the most responsible way at the same time as we deliver these surpluses. If they had their way, inflation would be higher, interest rates would be higher, wages would be lower, and there'd be absolutely no help for people doing it tough.
Before I call the member for Girard, Shadow Treasurer interjected 8 times during that answer. We're starting this fortnight with a lesson to everyone. There's consequences for actions. You're on a warning. You'll now leave the chamber under 94A. The Treasurer is now warned. The call to the member for Durack.
My question is to the Prime Minister. Has the Prime Minister ruled out the creation of a Makarrata Commission to oversee truth-telling and treaty? If so, why is there still money in the budget to create one?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Durack for her ongoing commitment to Indigenous Australians and for her interest on these issues and the constructive role that she wishes to play. I indeed spoke at the Gama Festival. I attended the Gama Festival along with the Education Minister, the Social Services Minister, the Indigenous Affairs Minister, the member for Barton, the member for Lingari, the member for Solomon and many other representatives of state governments. We were the only federal members who were there. It was an important gathering to discuss with First Nations people a way forward to close the gap. What we know is when it comes to closing the gap, we are not achieving the outcomes that I'm sure everyone here would want to see. We need to reduce the suicide rates. We need to reduce the incarceration rates. We need to reduce the rates between health and education that exist between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australia. The theme of this year's festival was Fire, Strength, Renewal. Fire, something that Yunupingu, who the Leader of the Opposition, attended his funeral. Really, at that point.
Order, members on my left. Members on my left. The manager is entitled to raise a point of order, and he shall do so.
You're a disgrace. Mr Speaker, on relevance, a very tight question. Has the Prime Minister ruled out the creation of a Makarrata Commission to oversee truth-telling and treaty? If so, why is there still money in the budget to create one? The Prime Minister should be directed to answer the question.
I'm listening carefully. I want to make sure the Prime Minister is on topic. He's talking about the visit to Gama. I'm hoping he will continue his answer regarding the question, which was about the Makarrata Commission for truth-telling. So he has had a preamble. I'm going to invite him to return to the question.
Indeed, Mr Speaker. Makarrata is a Yolngu word. Yolngu, the people who host the Gama Festival each year, for a coming together after struggle. No one can say there hasn't been a struggle in this country with Indigenous Australians when you have the closing the gap at that point. Coming together means actually sitting down and discussing the issues of how we move forward together. Now, those opposite might want to seek to continue to have division. What I'm seeking to do, and when I spoke at the Gama Festival about economic empowerment, is to search for ways, along with the new Minister for Indigenous Affairs, in which we can come together, which is what Makarrata is, coming together. Now, I seek for Australians to come together in order to advance the interests of Indigenous Australians, and I invite those opposite to actually stop with the attempts to divide and try to come together in order to close the gap, because that is our objectives. Now, during the referendum that was held last year, I was asked on multiple occasions a range of questions. I was asked about whether the voice would affect interest rates and defence bases and subs, nuclear-powered subs, and a whole range of issues. But I was also asked about treaty, and at that I indicated continually the same answer. I referred to the same answer before the referendum as afterwards, that is not the focus that we have.
Has concluded. Before I call the member for Boothby, I'd also like to acknowledge, as guests of the member for Lyons and the Minister for Agriculture, the Leader of the Opposition from Tasmania, the Deputy of the Opposition from Tasmania, Dean Winter, and Anita Dow. And I think he's just left, was advised by the member for Hinckley that the former member for Dawson is in the gallery today as well. The call to the honourable member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government investing in defence to keep Australians safe after a decade of mismanagement in defence?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Mr Speaker, last Monday I signed on behalf of the government the AUKUS Naval Nuclear Propulsion Agreement with the United States and the United Kingdom at Australia's Embassy in Washington, D.C. This is a foundational part of the legal underpinning of the announcement that was made by our three countries in San Diego last year, and it is another critical step forward in delivering AUKUS. When we came to power, AUKUS was really not much more than a thought bubble. But since then, we have been turning it into a reality. We have determined the actual pathway by which Australia will acquire a nuclear-powered submarine capability. We have now passed multiple tranches of legislation which have included the establishment of the Australian Submarine Agency, and along with legislation that was passed by the US Congress last year, we've created a seamless defence industrial base between our two countries, which is so critical to delivering this project. But most importantly, we have provided the funding, the increased funding in the budget to deliver AUKUS and much, much more, funding which those opposite did not provide. And all of this has happened because what the Albanese government says it does. And this stands in stark contrast to those opposite. Now, the Shadow Minister is reported in the media today saying that, on the one hand, he would like to see an increase in war stocks by 2026. But on the other, he is refusing to commit to an increase in defence spending against what those promised in the last election, which, to remind everyone, is $50 billion less over the decade than what this government has in the budget right now. The difference between the rhetoric and the reality is profound, but it should not be a surprise, because this was the business model of the Leader of the Opposition when he was the Defence Minister. He oversaw $42 billion worth of unfunded defence announcements, in addition to 28 different projects which were running 97 years over time. The complete dysfunction in the defence delivery, combined with the historic over-programming of the defence budget, is the literal last will and testament of the worst defence government that this country has ever seen. They were terrible in government. Today we see they're no better in opposition. The Albanese government is doing the detailed work, making the difficult decisions to deliver AUKUS and keep Australians safe.
The time has concluded. Give the call to the Leader of the Nationals.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture. Has the Minister's department modelled how much farmers will pay of the $2.3 billion Treasury has estimated in extra compliance costs for compulsory sustainability and Scope 3 reporting the government is introducing, and what will be the flow-on cost to families at the checkout?
Give the call to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry and the Minister for Small Business.
I thank the member opposite for his question. What I'd say to the member opposite is he knows that we're working on a plan in terms of sustainability and climate change for the agriculture sector, and that plan has been working on for some time. And I'd say to the member opposite that also, when it comes to food prices and competition, we all know what their policy is: divestiture of supermarkets, Mr Speaker. They don't have anything over there. They don't have anything over there. Of course, we are investing in making sure that we put downward pressure on food prices. That's why we funded Choice. That's why we did the ACCC inquiry, and that's why Dr Craig Emerson has conducted a review of the Food and Grocery Code of Conduct.
The Leader of the Nationals will resume his seat. Order. call to the honourable member for Corangamite.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Industry. How is the Albanese Labor government's Future Made in Australia plan helping Australian families deal with cost of living pressures, and what are the consequences of opposing this plan?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thank you, Speaker, and I want to thank the member for her question, because she knows an important way for Australians to deal with cost of living pressures is to hold down a secure, well-paying job. The bulk of manufacturing jobs being full-time, paying above average weekly earnings, and our Future Made in Australia plans champion Australian manufacturing, as does our $400 million Australian industry growth program. We got to back the efforts of small manufacturers to grow well-paying jobs with the announcement last week of the first grants from the IGP. And LIS Energy in the Corangamite electorate secured one of those grants to help the commercialisation of its development and production of its lithium-sulphur batteries. These batteries lighter, more powerful, targeted for use in aviation and defence. And LIS, they employ 25 people in Geelong and Brisbane, now looking to expand, and we set up the IGP to help emerging manufacturers to grow, be it LIS in Corangamite, be it Cauldron Molecules in Calare, be it Forager Robotics in Bonner, be it Brandsec in Melbourne, and be it Electrogenic Laboratories in Bradfield. So we're saying yes to Australian jobs, secure, well-paying jobs in manufacturing. We're saying yes to more Australian-made products made right here in this country, yes to workers earning more and keeping more of what they earn. Then the question is, what about those opposite? Always no, always negative. No to our $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund, no to energy price relief for Australian manufacturers, no to cost of living tax relief for workers. And when we announced, and here was the other one, when we announced our May budget, our Future Made in Australia initiatives, the Leader of the Opposition described our plans to scale up more work onshore as corporate welfare. Billions for billionaires. Tough talk. Tough talk. But last week, on his way to Western Australia, it seemed like that courage evaporated over the Nullarbor, because when he had to eyeball WA businesses keen to leverage off our announced production credits, the Leader of Opposition, he does what he normally does when he's under pressure. He says, we'll have more to say about that later. Tough guy. Where did you go? Tough on the East Coast, and then it just diminishes. On the West Coast, disappears. Disappears.
Order.
The tune changes.
Leader of the Nationals.
They have, their heart is not in it. They will not back Australian manufacturing. Saw off 100,000 manufacturing jobs in office, chased out the car industry, and now only ever talk about manufacturing to talk it down.
Order. Give the call to the honourable member for Goldstein.
To the Prime Minister. Goldstein constituents and other Australians tell me they want all gambling ads banned, yet it's been reported that you're planning only a partial ban. Rod Glover, husband of the late Peter Murphy, said today, quote, "Her main argument is really simple. In a really hard trade-off, you've got to put people first and think about what kind of future we want to create." Prime Minister, will you reconsider your reported position and honour Peter's legacy by banning all gambling ads?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Goldstein for her question. There's a fair bit of hypothetical in there about what our alleged position was. But we are working through these issues, and the government has made it very clear that the status quo regarding the saturation of gambling advertising, particularly where children are exposed to it, is untenable. The Minister for Communications and the Minister for Social Services are getting on with tackling gambling harm comprehensively, and we're doing that in a way that will ensure that there aren't unintended consequences of it. In today's world, where people have access to information instantaneously, including the member for Goldstein and others in this chamber here, on devices that they have, where things can just pop up and be received, we want to make sure that any measures do not have unintended consequences, and we're taking a comprehensive approach, recognising that this is a complex issue. The government has already delivered the most significant reform that has been done, more in 2 years than those opposite did in the previous 9. We have delivered the most significant online wagering harm reduction initiatives of the past decade. We've established mandatory custom ID verification for online wagering. We've banned the use of credit cards for online wagering. We've forced online wagering companies to send their customers monthly activity statements outlining wins and losses. We've introduced new evidence-based taglines that people will have seen, very different from just gamble responsibly that used to be there. We've provided direct funding for specialist financial counselling to support people affected by problem gambling. We've introduced nationally consistent staff training. We've introduced new minimum classifications for video games, and we've launched BetStop, the National Self-Exclusion Register. I have every respect for Rod Glover. He's been a friend of mine for a long period of time. He's a great Australian who has had to deal with the tragedy of losing his life partner, something that is felt by so many people in this chamber, not just on this side of the chamber, I acknowledge. I do note some people who, like John Howard, entering this debate, if only he'd been in a position to have some influence over public policy over this time. But the entire time that he occupied my seat, he did absolutely nothing about any of these issues.
Time has concluded. Order. The House comes to order. I'll hear from the member for Blair.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. How is Labor's Homes for Australia plan helping address the housing pressures Australians face, and what is standing in the way?
Call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Speaker. And the member for Blair is right. Australians are doing it tough right now, and housing is a big part of that story. Speaker, I've been the minister in this portfolio now for 2 weeks, and can I say I'm very honoured to progress the enormously important work of the member for Franklin in her time in this role. I have spent a lot of time since I became minister speaking to people directly affected by this problem. Speaker, I've spoken to a mum with a child with disability who has been forced to move house in the middle of her child's school year. I've spoken to renters whose landlords will not fix black mould in their homes, whose rents are rising too often and too fast. I've spoken to a lot of young people who are worried that they will be locked out of home ownership forever. And I've spoken to a woman who was a victim of long-term homelessness and talked to her about how housing is helping her rebuild her life. Now, Speaker, our country today is led by a Prime Minister whose entire life trajectory was reshaped by secure housing. And unsurprisingly, we have a bold and ambitious housing agenda. Speaker, for the first time in a decade, we have a Commonwealth government in this country saying we have responsibilities here and we can make a difference to this problem. The Commonwealth can't solve this problem alone, but it's not going to get solved without us. And, Speaker, that is why our government, in just 2 years in office, has invested $32 billion in helping Australians with this crisis. In fact, Speaker, I hear some murmurs from those opposite, and I'll remind them that our government invested more just in our last budget than the entire 9 years that those opposite were in office. Now, Speaker, our government also recognises that we've got a good long-term solution to this problem, but we're in crisis right now. And that's why, Speaker, our government has made the biggest increase to Commonwealth rent assistance in 30 years, 2 back-to-back increases to Commonwealth rent assistance that will see Australians get up to 40% increases on those payments. Now, Speaker, we've got 2 really important initiatives that are part of the puzzle here sitting in the Senate. One which will help more low-income Australians get into the housing market, and one which will help build more rental homes for our country. Speaker, now, would you believe that both of these initiatives are being blocked by the Liberals and the Greens in the Senate? And I would say to the parliament, one of my observations is that there is a hell of a lot of politics being played in this debate by people who are seeking to get a political outcome. Our goal and our government's goal in this debate is to make sure that we focus not on the politics, not on the politicians, not on the personalities, but on the fact that we have a generations-long housing crisis in this country, and our government is here to help.
Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Has the Prime Minister committed to anyone that he supports the establishment of a Makarrata Commission?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to see the Leader of the Opposition is focused on cost of living. What we've said on Makarrata is that we'll continue to engage. We held a referendum last year which wasn't successful. That's right, it wasn't successful. And what happens is that you accept that, you accept responsibility for it, something foreign to those opposite. We can accept our responsibility, you accept your responsibility for saying that it would have an impact on interest rates and on nuclear subs.
Has the Prime Minister concluded his answer? Order. Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. How is the Albanese Labor government acting to reduce the cost of energy? What policies leading to higher power prices has the government rejected?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for her question and, of course, her leadership when it comes to climate activism in her electorate. Now, Mr Speaker, since the parliament last sat, the $300 of energy bill relief for the Albanese government has been being applied to energy bills across the country. And of course that comes along with our tax cuts, which came into force on the 1st of July to provide cost of living relief to Australians today, when they need it, not in decades' time, but today, because that's when Australians are feeling the pressure. They're feeling the pressure right now, and so the relief is flowing right now. But of course, in the medium term, we're also continuing with the task of rolling out the cheapest form of energy, which is renewable energy, Mr Speaker. While both sides of the House agree that renewables play an important role in Australia's energy mix, we on this side of the House have faith in renewables, which now provide cheaper energy than non-renewables, Mr Speaker. Now, to be fair, that was a statement by the member for Fairfax in 2017, when the Liberal Party actually believed in renewable energy and recognised that it was the cheapest form of energy available. The member for Fairfax said that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy. And it's not just the member for Fairfax who thinks that. Real experts do as well, Mr Speaker. We've seen from Daniel Westerman, the Chief Executive of AEMO, who has said renewable generation connected with transmission and distribution, supported by hydro, batteries and gas, is the lowest cost way to supply energy and electricity to homes and businesses. And that's exactly what this government is doing. Renewables, supported by gas, supported by storage and supported by transmission. Now, Mr Speaker, the honourable member asked me what policies we have rejected. Well, I use the term policy lightly because what we've seen from the opposition is the announcement of 7 sites. That's it. No costings, no details, no number of gigawatts, just 7 nuclear power sites, Mr Speaker. I've seen more details on the back of a cornflakes packet than we have in the opposition's nuclear policy. Now, to assist those opposite, though, we can provide some details for them. Now, they've said that the power that they will generate on these 7 nuclear sites will replace the power from the coal-fired power stations that are on those sites. That is 11 gigawatts, or 3.7% of Australia's energy needs, Mr Speaker. 3.7% at a cost somewhere between $116 billion would be the cheapest and $600 billion based on the experience in the United Kingdom. That is between $10.5 billion and $54.5 billion a gigawatt. Now, that's a lot of dollars for not many gigawatts, Mr Speaker. Well done to the Leader of the Opposition, who says his plan to reduce the cost of power is in decades' time to introduce a form of power which is $55 billion a gigawatt. That's $55 billion a gigawatt is their genius plan. Well, we are not going to be distracted by these plans. We are going to continue with real cost of living relief today.
call to the honourable member for Wentworth.
My question is for the Minister representing the Minister for Workplace Relations. The construction industry is different. We've lived through 11,000 pages of Royal Commission reports, but once again shocking allegations of corruption and criminality and flatlining housing productivity over the last 20 years. The ABCC didn't stop some of these, but I believe, as many others do, that the industry is different and needs a different oversight mechanism. Will you consider a body or framework that brings together industry, unions and people across this parliament to truly clean up the industry?
Call to the Minister representing the Minister for Workplace Relations.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Wentworth for the question. And the oversight mechanism that the government is following through on is what we introduced to the Senate today, which is to place the CFMEU into administration. And the reasons for that are very strong. If you go through the three different options, which is to place the organisation in administration, to establish a watchdog of some sort, or to go down the path of deregistration, all involve fundamentally different outcomes. In going down the pathway of deregistration, in going down the pathway first of all of administration, it allows someone to be in charge to make sure that they can look at official by official and say that person should not be there, who can make sure that the union runs for its members, who can look at the money trail and say that money shouldn't be spent in a particular way. It is highly interventionist, which is only something that you do in extraordinary circumstances, which are the circumstances we face. The experience of a watchdog has been all the things we don't want. The first is the current leadership, who have caused the highest level of concern, in particular some from the Victorian branch, rose to power while the ABCC was there. That was when they came to power. Nigel Hadgkiss, as leader of it, it was admitted by Senator Cash in 2017 that she knew that he had been breaching the Fair Work Act while he was heading the watchdog. Labour productivity referred to in the question. Labour productivity fell in each of the years prior to the pandemic. Every year that the ABCC was there, productivity went down. You had an organisation, instead of trying to deliver on productivity, was obsessed with flags, was obsessed with stickers, would pull down a health and safety sign if it had a union sticker on it, was described by a judge of the federal court as saying, I hold the quote from the federal court, I hold the clear view that this is a case where the ABCC should be publicly exposed as having wasted public money without a proper basis for doing so. Since we abolished the ABCC, the number of days lost to industrial action fell by 30%. Fell by 30%. And when those opposite there start calling out now about wanting a cop on the beat, they forget that the ABCC was incapable of dealing with any criminal issues. It only dealt with civil issues. It was incapable of that. But instead, the third option is the one that is not being put forward by the crossbenchers, I understand it, but is put forward by those opposite, which is to say, why don't we have deregistration? And the answer is simple. What choices changed who could turn up to the Commission to negotiate? Whether you are registered or not, you can still turn up to the Commission. Under their proposal, the full leadership of the CFMEU would stay in power, could still negotiate, nothing would be fixed.
Concluded. Order. The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Parramatta.
My question is to the Minister for Cyber Security. What was the government's role in the response to the CrowdStrike outage?
The call to the Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Parramatta for the question and acknowledge the work that he himself is now doing in assisting me in the cyber area. The outage that took place on Friday the 19th of July, caused by an update published by CrowdStrike, has been described as the biggest IT outage of all time. It ricocheted all around the world, including in Australia. Now, it was not a cyber attack, but all the systems that had been put in place by my predecessor, the member for Hotham, were able to be tested and showed that Australia is far better prepared for cyber attacks than comparable nations. In establishing the National Cyber Security Coordinator, in establishing that this would be used for the National Coordination Mechanism. CrowdStrike brought down systems across the whole country and around the world. It left travellers stranded at airports. It posed issues for supermarkets, supply chains. It disrupted countless businesses. Every single one of us had people in our electorates unable to get money, unable to purchase goods because of the way this had interfered with Australian systems. Within 3 hours of the CrowdStrike update being published, the government had convened the National Coordination Mechanism. Now, members will be familiar with the mechanism, but not historically with its involvement with cyber. Anyone who's held the emergency service portfolio is aware of the way the National Coordination Mechanism brings in who is relevant to each crisis when it happens, gets them all together and starts working it through together through the leadership of the government. It's what we use for natural disasters, cyber incidents since the change of government and threats to critical infrastructure. The first meeting, as I said, was convened within 3 hours of CrowdStrike, the update going out. It was chaired by the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs Cyber and Security Group. It included representatives from the company CrowdStrike itself, a wide range of Australian, state and territory government representatives and key industry representatives. 7 meetings like this continued over the following days. The process was led by staff from my department, including the National Cyber Security Coordinator, a position which did not exist before the change of government, led by Lieutenant General Michelle McGuinness. It found ways to deal with the long tail of consequences that stem from an outage of that scale. All of this was only possible. All of this was only possible because we changed the government. All of it was only possible because we changed the government. If they'd been still in, no cabinet minister to deal with cyber threats, no dedicated office within my department, and the National Coordination Mechanism not available for cyber.
The minister's time has concluded. Call to the honourable member for Deakin.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing. Minister, has CFMEU corruption and lawless behaviour added to construction and housing costs for everyday Australians?
Call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for his question. Speaker, we have a construction union in our country which has become riddled with corruption and wrongdoing, and our government is taking the strongest possible action to reset that union. Speaker, today in the Senate, the government has introduced legislation that will allow the Minister for Industrial Relations to appoint an administrator who will have sweeping powers to do what is needed to be done to clean up this union.
The Minister will pause. The member for Deakin on point of order.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. My question was very tight. It was just asking the Minister whether the CFMEU's corruption and lawless behaviour has added to housing costs for everyday Australians.
Order. Order. It was a tight question, and the Minister has had 30 seconds as a preamble. She'll need to make sure her answer is directly relevant. I appreciate the member wants a yes, no, perhaps a figure or something under the standing orders. I can't compel the minister to answer it a certain way, but having some context given now, she's going to have to return to the question.
Of course.
Or resume her seat.
Thank you, Speaker. I've talked about the action that the government is taking, and I do want to make the point that this is stronger action than anything that was done by those opposite in the almost decade that they were in power, despite all of the complaining that went on. Now, Speaker, we have a housing crisis in our country which has been 40 years in the making, and for a long time the Commonwealth stepped right out of this policy area. This issue is too important for our citizens.
He's
already had a point of order, as I understand, Speaker.
Well, I was going to deal with this issue, but the minister can pause. The member for Deakin is obviously raising on another point of order.
Yeah, the minister's defying your ruling. She's
not
answering to answer the...
Resume your seat. Well, I'm trying to help the member. The minister needs to return to the question, or she will be sat down to simply talk about what is happening in order. Order. So Order. Members on my left, the member is entitled to ask a question. It was a very tight question. A historical context, we're past that point. If the minister can't answer the question or doesn't want to add extra information, that's okay, but she's got one final chance here. Otherwise,
Sure.
I'll ask her to resume her seat.
Speaker, I've talked about the strong action that the government is taking. There is analysis that shows impacts on residential construction. There are experts in industry that say that it has no impact on residential construction. The point I would make is that the policy fix is exactly the same, Speaker. The policy fix is exactly the same. What we need to do is take this union and clean it up. The activity in this union is dragging down not only the union itself, but in fact the reputation of the union movement in our country, and that is why our government takes this so seriously, Speaker. Now, I would say again, Speaker, the opposition had 10 years almost that they were in power to do something about this problem. Right. Instead, it took until we came to government to make sure we clean up this union once and for all.
Order. 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 When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the order. We'll hear from the member from Macarthur. The member from Macarthur will resume his seat. The Leader of the Opposition on point of order.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Prime Minister made an unparliamentary remark and he should withdraw.
I didn't. Order. 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 Members on my right, the Minister for Social Services, the Minister for Education. If the Prime Minister has made an unparliamentary remark, okay. Order. The member for Macarthur was on his feet.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. What action is the Albanese Labor government taking to make medicines cheaper? Why is this action needed, and how are new listings on the PBS improving the health of Australians?
Call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the terrific member for his question. Australia, as he knows, has one of the best medicine systems in the world, underpinned by the PBS, which of course was another great Labor legacy, opposed at the time by the Liberal Party. The PBS, Mr Speaker, ensures that Australians get access to the best cutting-edge medicines available anywhere in the world at affordable prices, Mr Speaker. And in just 2 years, we have made 200 new or expanded listings to that PBS. This month, we expanded access to Trikafta to children under the age of 5 years who are living with cystic fibrosis, Mr Speaker. A new child is born in Australia with CF every 4 days, and as a long-time paediatrician, the member for Macarthur knows better than anyone in this chamber just how devastating that condition is for those kids and for their families. But Trikafta, Mr Speaker, is simply amazing, and its impact is almost immediate. Ashley, who's the mother of a 4-year-old boy, Heath, she said at the time we listed this, "A few people have said today, what does this mean to us? And in my family," she said, "it means hope. We just can't wait to keep planning the long life for Heath that we know he's now going to have." But it's also expensive, Mr Speaker. Indeed, without PBS listing, this medicine costs as much as $250,000 every year. From this month, though, an additional 330 kids every year will get access to this new medicine at affordable PBS prices, Mr Speaker, PBS prices that we have been making even cheaper in the 2 years that we've been in government. Slash the maximum amount that pensioners pay by 25%, the biggest cut to the price of medicines in the 75-year history of the PBS, Mr Speaker, and finally allowing doctors to issue 60 days' supply of common medicines for ongoing health conditions, Mr Speaker. And of course, in May, the Treasurer froze the price of PBS medicines for up to 5 years, a measure which, just in and of itself, will save patients as much as $500 million over the coming 5 years. But, Mr Speaker, we are determined to keep making medicines cheaper, because it's good for the hip pocket, obviously, but it's also good for Australians' health. Now, the Leader of the Opposition has always taken a different view of this, as Australians will very well remember. He was a member of the government which, back in 2005, under John Howard, jacked up the price of medicines by almost $5 a script. He then tried to do the same again when he was the Health Minister in 2014 by another $5 a script, and of course in this term of parliament he has opposed all of our cheaper medicines policies. Well, that's what you would get again from this man, Mr Speaker. Services always going down, prices always going up.
Talk to the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. I ask further questions placed on the notice paper.